Welcome everyone to the Equal Opportunities Committee. It's the 7th meeting of 2014. Can I ask everyone to set off their electronic devices to flight mode or off, please? Thanks very much. We'll begin by introductions round the table. At the table we have our clerking team and research team together with official reporters. And around the room we're also supported by broadcasts and services and security officers. My name is Margaret McCulloch and I'm the convener of the committee. And I now invite committee members to introduce themselves in turn, starting on my right.
Good morning, I'm Marco Biaggi. I'm the MSP for Edinburgh Central and I am the Deputy Convener of the committee.
John Mason, MSP for Glasgow Shettleston.
Alec Johnston, Member for North East Scotland.
Christian Arad, good morning, Member for North East Scotland.
Hi, Siobhan McMahon, MSP Central Scotland.
We took item 1 on our agenda today in private. The second agenda item today is a decision on taking business in private. Members are asked to agree to take consideration of a draft report of the Fathers in Parenting Inquiry in private at this and future meetings. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Members are also asked to agree whether to take consideration of the approach to the draft budget scrutiny 2015-16 in private at future meetings also. Thank you. Agenda item 3 today is oral evidence on the Fathers in Parenting Inquiry. And today we have 2 panels of witnesses, concluding with evidence from the Minister for Children and Young People. I'd like to welcome our first panel of witnesses, and could I ask you all to introduce yourself in turn, starting with Dr. Clapton.
Yes, good morning. My name is Gary Clapton and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Edinburgh.
Good morning, my name is Karen Love. I'm the team manager for the Sure Start and Early Years Outreach Service, part of West Lothian Council.
Good morning, I'm Inez Murray. I'm here representing the National Day Nurse Association. I own and manage 2 nurseries in Glasgow.
Good morning, my name is Fiona Robertson. I'm Senior Community Learning and Homeschool Partnership Worker in South Lanarkshire Council.
Hello, I'm Donny Scott. I'm a Service Manager in the Children and Families Department in Edinburgh, responsible for family and community support.
Thank you very much. Can I also ask witnesses if you've got any questions, just to indicate to myself or the clerk on my left if you would like to speak. We've already heard evidence from fathers and support groups and employers and trade unions, and as I say, this is our 4th session for witnesses from yourself as well. We have a number of questions that we'd like to ask you as well, and obviously if you've got other information you'd like to give, then that's welcome as well. John Mason would like to start off the questions.
Okay, thanks, Convener. As the Convener was saying, we've had a number of witnesses already, both individual fathers and some representing organisations, and there has been a suggestion that there's quite a lot of gender stereotyping out there, both public sector, private sector and so on. So my first question really is to ask, I mean, specifically if you can, about your own organisation, do you feel this is a problem? And but I'm happy that you go wider than that and make general comments about gender stereotyping, and obviously particularly gender stereotyping in regard to men.
So who would like to speak first? Will I pick someone? Go on, no, you volunteered, on you go.
No, I volunteered, my colleague on my left. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, Gary Clapton, from the university, as I say, and you'll have seen the submission of mine, and it's something that I've looked at, and it's been particularly around publicity, where I've found evidence of stereotyping, in the sense that the publicity for children and families materials has been particularly one-sided that I found in the research, whereas there are a lack of fathers and father images in the materials in the National Health Service I didn't look at, but I'm certain that there are similar examples of the ones I found at a national and a local level. National services such as the Curriculum for Excellence and local services that are run by the councils, especially in, say, social work services, where you find not so much the images, but where you do get examples of case scenarios and case studies where the only ones that I found were depicting fathers in an incredibly negative light.
Yeah. Well, I think the point about the power of Gary's presentation is that he's actually done systematic study on these things. I think from our experience, it is true very commonly, not universally, but it's very commonly true that social work practice tends to exclude fathers. So, for example, in child protection work or in work where there's concerns about domestic abuse, there's a tendency to address the mother, to work with the mother, and to try not to engage with the father. And that's something that we're very concerned about. The other area where I think there is significant stereotyping is in the early years workforce, and actually the care workforce generally, but certainly the early years workforce tends to be massively female.
I could probably
Yep.
pick up on that point from the employment perspective. In the most recent NDNA newsletter, there was an article about perception of some parents that men in childcare was not right, and comments such as, "I don't want that male practitioner to change my baby's nappy." My personal experience is quite the opposite. I find when I do get men to come in to work with children, they are very good role models. And I think that's one of the most important things that came out with the research, was the lack of positive comment that young men especially need to have good role models, not specifically Simon Cowell, but somebody who's going to show them that to care, to show their feelings is okay. I think we have to get schools far more involved in this perception of gender stereotyping, because they still come, a young girl doesn't know what to do, she goes into childcare or hairdressing. So it's very important that the schools are actively involved in this, to let young men know that it's okay to go to college to do childcare or social care. It's okay, if you don't want to go to college, get in apprenticeships. Apprenticeships, I think, are the best way. That's how I employ most of my staff, is through apprenticeships, and to give them that opportunity to develop a successful career.
Fiona and Karen, would you like to comment?
I could probably just add that we have some male workers within our early years service, which has allowed us to diversify our early years service. That's the tip of the iceberg, though. I think that we also echo that within social work practice there's not a great male representation within that. Some of the research that we've done anecdotally with working with the fathers that we work with would find that they want to actively be involved in their children's lives, but when they go to mother and baby groups, mother and toddler groups, their very language already alienates them, and they feel further alienated when they walk through that door. So I think that there's a real thing for me about that.
I would agree. I think in terms, particularly in the early years and nursery settings, they're not seen as being places for men generally, and therefore dads don't particularly feel comfortable coming into the building. And sometimes some of the staff are not particularly comfortable with men. It's not seen as a place for men, so therefore it's hard to engage dads if it's not seen as a place that's welcoming. Just in terms of stereotyping, I think there's also another issue in terms of not just gender stereotyping, but sometimes the images that are portrayed of men are perceived as being a certain type of man who gets involved, and it's a very kind of middle class image, and it's a very kind of well-to-do image. And again, for some of the dads that we work with, that image, even although it is of a dad participating in something, can equally put them off as much as the kind of female stereotyping as well.
Sorry, on you go. Yes, right.
No.
Right. I mean, Dr. Clapton's obviously from a university and presumably cannot speak for all the universities, but I mean, I'm just wondering, if to take the university as an example, I mean, does the university just have to be passive in, you've got people coming to you to train as primary teachers, I guess, and some of the other care professions. Do you just have to accept, if it's 99% women and 1% men, that that's the way it is? Or has the university got a role in recruiting and advertising its courses, or what?
Oh, I can't speak for the recruitment policy of even Edinburgh University, but I do. I have run the social work course, the 4 years undergraduate course, and we've often done our utmost to, pitch it for male students, and yet in the classes that I continue to have, it's 90% women and 10% men in the class. And there are things we do and have done in terms of the way we organise our publicity, but I think that there's a bigger problem in the way that the profession is represented. And actually, to be honest, much of the stuff that I've looked at that I haven't talked to today includes training examples on social work courses which continue to stereotype men and pigeonhole fathers as dodgy or absent. And so I think that we've got a fair bit to do in the training side, the education side, to get our house in order. However, to come back to your point, yeah, there are obviously things that have been done in terms of it, but I do believe that it's the profession itself. If that was to sort of like be more, let's say, father-facing or man-friendly, then it would be more likely to attract recruits.
So we're needing really a whole change in culture more than just one or two specific actions. Is that your feeling?
I think it comes from a much wider issue. I mean, there's a whole issue about, you know, the way we have stereotypes about Scottish men. But yes, it goes beyond simply, you know, my ability to sort of like attract, you know, prospective students to the courses. It's, I think the next one up in terms of the kind of Russian dolls analogy would be the profession, as I said, you know, the caring professions in general is not seen as a kind of a manly endeavour to engage in. You know, we know from childcare and primary schools, for instance, but social work too, that these are not ones that don't immediately appeal to your young lad at 17 or 18. They ought to, but they don't.
Could I ask, probably Ines, to start with, regarding sort of attracting men into the childcare area? When you're advertising for staff, what is the kind of ratio of male applicants to female applicants?
It's going to be a difficult one for me to answer because I don't actually advertise for staff.
Right.
People tend to just come to me, and
yeah.
I have a good staff retention, so it's not a big issue for me. But I understand where you're coming from, and I think that is it's very interesting. Because I had said, can we effect a sea change in our culture? And that's what it's how we're going to go about doing that. And I think, back to my point, I think it has to come from schools, careers. It has to come from that point to start it off. And that's where, from my viewpoint, it goes. I know in Glasgow they have big job fairs, and we get invited to go to that. But I would use a training company that perhaps to do that. But it takes a lot for a young man to go to a stand at a jobs fair that is for childcare, because the perception is there. Why do you want to work in childcare? So that's why we have to have a sea change in culture. How we effect that, I don't know.
Siobhan McMahon.
Thank you. Something Fiona had said in your evidence, you said that sometimes fathers might not feel welcome when they're dropping their children off. And we heard that in evidence, actually, from some fathers that they thought, you know, they were looked at or they weren't as welcomed by the staff. I just wonder how you challenge that, because obviously Nez is talking about how staff are work together, but a male going into that environment as a staff member might not be welcomed with their colleagues, and therefore the retention of that male, obviously you say you have good retention, so what is the best practice for that, but also to challenge the behaviour that when the fathers are dropping their children off, that they do feel welcome, that they are part of that, and that the staff understand that fathers aren't really that different to mothers dropping off their children?
I think it's kind of, there's two parts to that. There's what happens when they actually drop the children off and what they're met with, but there's also their perceptions of what will happen. So sometimes people perceive things to be happening that aren't necessarily the case, if you know what I mean. Certainly we in South Lanarkshire, we do a kind of multi-agency training around for staff through our Getting It Right for Every Child, around about awareness raising as to why engaging dads is so important and for the benefits for children. And we've very heavily labour the benefits for children. You know, it is about what children get out of dads being involved, and we have staff from nurseries, from social work, from NHS who participate in that. The staff need to know why it's important, because for some of them their primary focus is obviously the child. So if they don't understand the impact that everybody around the child has on the child and how that will impact on their job and the well-being of the child, then they might just see it as seen as something that's additional to them, that's something that we don't. And that can generally happen within any kind of parenting engagement process. So if they understand why it's important, if they understand that they need to be aware of their environments, that the environments that they're working in, they need to look at it from the perspective of both mums and dads coming in. How easy is it to come into the building? What sort of reception do they get when they come into the building? And equally, that they don't cheer when a dad comes in, because sometimes you can go too far the other way and scare them off. Yes, yay! And I suppose most importantly is that it's a whole organisation approach. It has to be everybody. It has to be from the person answering the phone, and that they're not kind of passed on as soon as they come in the door. That, you know, the nursery staff are interested in me and they're interested in my child, and they see me as being important in my child's life as well. So if you can get the staff on board, and it's going right through the organisation from a management right down to practitioners on the ground, it does have to be a whole organisation. And as I said, the kind of key message for any staff, because all the staff who are in there because they want what's in the best interest of the children that they're working with. So that's how you sell it to them, and it's also how you sell it to mums as well.
How would you monitor that though? So if it's not happening, so we had an evidence from a father who thought it wasn't happening, and unfortunately or from South Lanarkshire. So how would you monitor that that's happening or not?
As I said, it has to be whole organisational. Management have to take their responsibility in that process as well. So sometimes it's difficult to get managers into the awareness raising sessions that we run. Certainly we get a lot of practitioners sent along, but then they have to have the support of management to be checking up and to be disseminating that around the whole nursery or the whole organisation. So it can just be one person who's kind of flying the flag and seen as being the person who works with dads or engages with dads. So there has to be a management procedure. Equally, things that we've found helped have been where it's written into service plans, where it's written into kind of policies, that we are strategically looking to engage fathers, and it's something that we are trying to do. Therefore, they become accountable to the education department, to system, where it is written in. There is then a kind of impetus on them to report back, so they have to do things and have to be seen. And again, inspection processes.
Scott, and then Yep, Donna.
I think this point about it being written into policies is really important. And in thinking about coming here, I was what I've realised, or just been chewing over in my mind, is the fact that there's still a challenge. Certainly, in my authority, there's still a challenge in engaging parents, whether mothers or fathers. And there's, I think services have tended to be services for children have tended to be structured around, you hand the children over to us and we'll educate them and we'll look after them and then we'll hand them back to you. And obviously we're all starting to think much more about connecting with the strengths of families and the strengths of communities, and for all kinds of reasons. So there's a sense in which we've been, Gary Clapton's paper is subtitled Father-Proofing Your Work, and I think we've been sort of parent-proofing our work, but we have not adequately built into policies this question about, it's not just parents in a sort of gender-neutral way. It's got to be mothers and fathers. And part of the driver for that is also, I think, understanding that this is not just about being fair to fathers. This is actually very, very important for children. And for example, there's another academic Bridget Daniel, professor at Stirling, who quite a long time ago wrote a book about engaging with fathers for health, for I can't remember, social care professionals, something like that. And she talked about the fact that if you don't engage the father, say you've got a separated father, you don't engage the father, you're not just missing out on the benefits that man can bring, you're also missing out on his parents and the aunties and uncles, and that whole side of the family is, those resources are not there for the child. So that's just one reason. There are many, many reasons why this is, in practice terms, very, very important. So I'm just sort of underlining the fact that I think it's policy, not just at the nursery level, but I think institutionally for the whole organisation.
Yes, thanks. I want to echo the policy emphasis, but also to come back to the kind of micro level about what you were asking about that front door question. And I think it's an important one. And I've also done a wee bit of work on that too, which is the think about the feel of a place, the reception areas, the foyers, the GP surgeries, the social work reception. And they are places where, for want of a better word, men aren't really expected to be. If you think about the leaflets on the walls, the posters, who they face, you know, there are zero tolerance posters, not that I'm against them, of course, but there are a number of other leaflets, moonwalk and so on, and posters that are addressed to women. And there's very, very little in terms of publicity. Reading material, you'll find Bella and Take a Break on the tables, and very little else, right down to colour schemes and so on. I know it seems a bit kind of micro, but they are important about giving off a message. And the message is that if fathers are optional, then the other side of that coin is that women have sole responsibility for children, and that's you know, a lose-lose.
Thank you. Mark, Christian? Yep.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. I truly wanted to point on that point when I read from your excellent paper that is detrimental to mothers as it overburdens them with sole rather than shared responsibility. I wanted, if you could expand on this, do you feel, because we did as a committee some work on women at work, do you think we are in the same ground? Which means that the two are joining up, that this exclusion of fathers to the role of looking after their children is excluding women to some type of careers they could have. And do you think that, you know, we just heard Dennis Scott talking about maybe a little attack on gender neutrality. Maybe we would be a lot more focused on fathers and mothers and trying to redefine the role, the traditional role of fathers and mothers?
I think that, you know, if the message is intended for parents, then the envelope's addressed to mothers only. And I've concentrated on the envelope, that is the publicity for services. And we have moved from, you know, dropping the notion of mother and toddlers groups, but we've moved to this kind of like, what I think is a fairly, it's not working, parent and toddlers groups, or father, support groups for parents. And they haven't, it's been proven, they haven't actually drawn in the fathers. So I think what we have to, it's not about bending the stick, I think we have to talk about, as you've said, mothers and fathers where it's appropriate. I mean, obviously you need to use parents often, but I do think we need to address fathers, because society's default position just now is when you talk about parents, you think mother. And that's across the board. And my profession, social work research and research in general, is as guilty of that as anybody else. And that, you know, often research that purports to say parents have told us this is actually mothers who've been in when the interview is called, and it's false to say that this is parents. It's actually often mothers who've reported on X, Y, and Z. You'll find that in one of our big studies called Growing Up in Scotland, who have acknowledged the fact that they've often not got to the fathers and find a report on the family is actually a report by the mother.
Yes.
I see it in the private sector where I work. I think perhaps it's easier for us to work with both parents if both parents are there. At the moment, I care for over 200 children with a wide variety mix of family setups and cultures and things. but in the back of that is the inspection process that we have to go through, and the Care Inspectorate are very, very keen on parental participation. I had an inspection yesterday at one of my nurseries, and that was one of the lead things that they check, and they check the evidence trail of all that we've done. And it is more difficult to engage fathers, but it was interesting to look at the number of dads that were bringing in their children or collecting their children, and there was a very good percentage. That, of course, is because mum was working later. I tend to look after parents of working families or parents who are at college accessing training, but it's the parents, the dads bringing them in, and you're absolutely right. It's how you welcome them is crucially important, and we work very, very hard to make sure that both sets of parents, if there are both sets of parents, are treated exactly the same.
Alex, then John.
Just a very quick one. What you were saying there, is there really a significant and noticeable difference between public sector and private sector experience in this area?
I'm hearing here about policy decisions having to be made so that staff know what to do and management to take that on board. That's not how it would work with in my nurseries at all, because it's all part of the process that we go through. I don't have enough knowledge of the public sector to properly answer that question.
Maybe I could ask somebody who's got the public sector experience to compare what you've just heard.
I think, well, just before we were coming up, we were sort of swapping a few notes, and there is a sense in which it does depend on the individual manager of an individual service. So you do get managers who really do understand this, and they have put policies in place in their own policies, in the sense of, I don't know whether they've written them down or not, but they're making it quite clear in their institution they want to move forward in terms of involving dads, and some of them are actually good at it. So whereas in other settings people haven't really thought about it.
John Mason.
Usually a supplementary for Ms Murray. You said the Care Inspectorate were in yesterday and they were interested in parental involvement. I mean, were they distinguishing between father's involvement and mother's involvement?
That is a question that I haven't had feedback yet.
Did they ask you about that?
They didn't, and they haven't. They've just been looking at evidence. They haven't come back to talk to us about that yet, so I can't answer that question yet. I would happily listen carefully to what they're coming from and get back to you about that.
I mean, I don't know much about these inspectorates. Do they come in and just you give them a pile of stuff that they go
no,
in and look at?
No. That would be lovely. No, it's a very intense.
So they are actually asking you questions?
Yes, well, they'll ask staff questions.
Yes.
So I don't know what. So it'll be the
right.
staff who'll be answering that, and then they come to the management.
Yes.
I mean, we've already had discussion, but not specifically about that. But participation, parental participation, is crucially important.
Yes. Well, I would be interested, if you could feed back to us maybe via your staff or your staff via you. Had they been specifically on that point, or was it just this wider parental involvement? Thanks.
Very interesting.
Karen.
It's perhaps a slight digression, but I think we're talking about engaging fathers, but we're talking about engaging fathers postnatally when children are already here. Fathers are not engaged within maternity services. There's no midwife appointment for a dad to go along and discuss his hopes and fears about his child coming into this world, what he's looking forward to, what he's fearing most about that. That antenatal appointments are very much focused on the mother within that. So even at the very antenatal stage, we're disengaging fathers at that point. When mothers are on postnatal wards, all the evidence would show us that it's good for the father to remain there with the mother, but he's shown out at the end of visiting, and she's then left without that support, which also takes on Dr Clapton's point about mothers being better supported if fathers are involved in that. So whilst it's a bit of a digression, I think it's important to note.
Karen, could I ask you to give us an overview of Sure Start and what the organisation actually does?
We're an early intervention service for birth to 3, and we've been within our local authority for about 15 years now. I'm just new in post, so bear with me while I'm trying to scramble these bits of information from my head. We have a very robust service which we feel supports parents as much as it can possibly do. We provide antenatal groups for fathers in the evening, which are 6-week programmes that look at baby care tasks, what that's going to be for them, how they're going to manage those baby care tasks. We also look at how they're going to support their female partner within that. We look at baby brain development, early childhood development, so that fathers are getting a more robust view of that. We also provide antenatal support for young fathers, so those fathers that are under 21 years of age, we provide that. We unfortunately are not in a position at the moment to provide universal dad support at weekends. And that would be something that I would hope that as an agency we could take forward. We have much more focus on mothers as we do on fathers, but I do feel that we're getting better at engaging with fathers. I do feel that as a service we have, and as an authority, it's not just within early years but also within school services, that we have support groups for fathers that are engaged by fathers. I mean, I think we have a dads group on a Monday afternoon that is currently working with 17 dads, which for a local authority it's quite small. It's not the same amount as mothers, but it's a starting point, and it's something that we can then build on, and hopefully we're breaking down some of that culture.
Christian?
Just a little supplementary on that. Thank you, Convener. I visited one new centre in rural Aberdeenshire, and no, it was not a centre. It was the same kind of thing with care, and they said they tried very, very hard in the rural setup to involve fathers, but they got very, very few responses. You know, the word they used was father seems to be invisible and not happy to engage. Did you find the same thing? Was it more a rural thing, you think?
I don't think that we find that as much. We're in a very fortunate position that we have access to our own people carrier and our own minibus, and our dad's workers are able to go out and pick up the guys. So if the guys are saying that they're interested, they wanted to come along, every mail that's referred to us, or every mail, and that can be referral from professional, be it health professional, social work professional, or themselves, if they've heard of the group within their community and want to come along. If they phone up, they get a visit to hear what the group's about. And we will provide transport. So if they're within some place that's not accessible, if the groups stay running in Whitburn and they live 20 minutes away and they can't get it from public transport because public transport links are not great, then we will go and pick them up, and that will either be in our own minibus, in our people carrier, or in our cars. Do you know? So for us, we don't view that we make transport a barrier to that. If the service is there, we will endeavour to get that father and mother there to that service.
Okay. Fiona, can I actually ask you to give an overview of what your organisation actually does with families as well?
My service is the Community Learning Homeschool Partnership Service across South Lanarkshire. Our remit is around about adult and family learning opportunities within the council, and we sit within Integrated Children's Services within the Education Department in South Lanarkshire. Basically, we originally, due to restructuring, it's been a long process, our homeschool partnership side are kind of focus on the family engagement. We have staff who are based in schools in both primary and secondary schools across South Lanarkshire who work within individual schools but also with the surrounding communities, and their remit is to engage mums, dads and carers in their own and their children's learning. So they provide learning opportunities that support children's learning at home. They also provide opportunities for parents to come into the schools and take part in activities within the school day, within the school classrooms, but they also have opportunities within the communities in the evenings as well for sort of family learning opportunities. We do everything from curricular-based supports, so helping parents understand what the curriculum is, how they can support their children in kind of literacy and numeracy. They have kind of take-home packs as well that go home and families can work on at home, as well as particularly for families who can't physically come into the school because of work commitments or disabilities or just kind of family circumstances. Sometimes it can be difficult to get people in. So we try to make it as easy as possible for families to work with their children. But we also do things that kind of build the parent capacity. So we have parenting programmes, parent support around about handling children's behaviour, building self-esteem in your child, helping with homework tasks, just giving parents more confidence in being able to support their children's learning. We also have programmes where we've had parents go in and offer peer support within secondary schools and within primary schools, kind of paired reading and buddying. So the parents will go in and spend half an hour with a child on a one-to-one, increasing language skills. For all of those processes, there's a full kind of training programme and induction programme and continuous support. And a lot of our parents from that have then gone into work from kind of classroom support and other areas of education. Some have went on to college as well. So it is a kind of holistic family learning approach, because it is about increasing the child's capacity, but it's also about building confidence within the families themselves to be able to do that and engaging all members of the family. So sometimes we have, for example, grandparents who come along to the daytime in class sessions, but then it's mum and dad who do the work at home with the children as well, and it's just about trying to communicate that that's fine. It doesn't need to be a person who takes responsibility. It can be a kind of mix across the board.
And what kind of percentage do you have of fathers participating as against like, mothers?
Within our family learning, we started to kind of focus on fathers about 7 years ago, when we were sitting at 11% of our activities were engaged by fathers. This year we're up to 27% at the moment, still counting, hoping that goes up the way. It's an ongoing battle in terms of it is a culture change. It's a culture change not just for the families, but it's also a culture change for staff and organisations as well. So it is a slow process, but we are heading in the right direction, and it remains for us a service priority as well, which has been key in terms of our service planning, so that staff are aware that that is something they're going to be asked about, it is something they're going to be measured on, and it's something that we are accountable for.
So what did you do over that year to increase that percentage increase then?
7 years. Sorry.
Oh, 7 years, sorry, 7 years. That's wonderful.
I would be very impressed. I'd have been happy with that. Basically, we started with the staff team, so we did the induction and the selling process to the staff team, that this is going to be a focus from us. From a managerial perspective, we want to focus on this. This is why we want to focus on it. Again, the whole thing about we're in this for the benefits for children. This is about safeguarding and providing our children with the best opportunities, and to do that, you use everything round about them. So dads are a resource for that as much as mums. So we started from that point of view. We were very fortunate, both at the time that we started, the gender equality duty came into play. So we managed to get that as a target within our statement of commitment. So it had a, again, more robust kind of answerable. And it was good in terms of us also selling it up the way to other management, saying, we need to be doing this needs to be taken on board, we've got a duty to do this. Staff were encouraged to come up with initiatives to engage fathers. Our whole process was not about starting dads groups, it was about getting dads across the board into our generic programmes. It wasn't about dad only programmes. As it turns out, that was one of the ways that we got dads in, because we did a survey asking dads. We had a lot of anecdotal evidence from mums saying that dads were doing a lot of the work at home, they were spending a lot of time with their kids at home, they were doing lots of things out with formal services. So it wasn't that they weren't interested, and it wasn't that they weren't passionate, it's just that services weren't accessible for them for whatever reason. So we initially did a survey and asked them what they were engaged with at home, and also what the barriers were to their engagement with formal services. And the kind of key ones that came up were, as expected, were kind of time and work commitments. But they were also very honest in saying that sometimes the things that are on offer just aren't of interest to them. Their time is very precious in terms of the time that they've got outside work or other commitments, so they judge whether or not this is something that they want to spend their time doing. So it has to be sold to them on the basis of, here's what's in it for you, here, and being specific about what's in it for you. We changed our publicity. We took out parents, moved to mums and dads. We had, the dads came back and said they were interested in dad-only groups, and particularly around about outdoors. So we kind of started programmes around about what the types of things that they were interested from. We ended up with dad-only groups, but we also had kind of family days as well. We've done a whole range of initiatives around about different age groups, different target groups, but again, just selling that message that, you know, the dads are important and that they're welcome as well, because again, one of the things that we're saying was they didn't necessarily think it was for them, or it was for a specific type of dad. And then from that, you get the dads selling it to other dads for you and showing the benefits. One of the key things that came out for us, we were school-based. One of the key things that came out of the survey was that they didn't get information from school. They were relying on mum to pass information on from school, because generally it came through school bag mail. And generally it was mum that went through the bag, got the information. If she didn't think it was relevant to dad, she didn't necessarily pass it on. If it said parent, she took it on as her responsibility. Again, it was a cultural shift, so it was about making sure that happened. And for dads who were in share care positions, that was even worse. If their relationship with the mum was not particularly positive, then she didn't pass information on at all. So we established our service website so that dads could access directly information about what was happening in the area and what was going on.
John Mason and then Gary.
Yes, you touched on work there, and I was interested in that, and I don't know if any of the other would want to contribute as well, because we've been looking at this a wee bit as to are there fathers out there who want to get more involved in the kind of formal stuff you're talking about as well as at home, but the problem is at their work. And is that then, the next question then is either, is that their own attitude that they've got to be at work, or is it the employer's attitude that there'll be, and we've had some suggestion that some employers are willing to be more flexible with the mother, but are not so willing to be flexible with the father if they're looking for a bit of time to get to some meeting or whatever it might be. And I mean, I'd be interested to know if that's your experience. And actually, not just employers, even wider the DWP, with a suggestion that they will be more flexible with a mother than they will be with a father.
I think it depends, obviously, on the employers, and sometimes it is the perception of, well, they have to be at work. So it depends, again, on what spectrum of employment they're in and how flexible that is generally for any staff. I mean, we have had dads who have taken time off work to come to a programme if they feel that it's of significant benefit. We, as a service, are quite fortunate because our staff work a flexible working week, so we do evening programmes, and we have done weekend initiatives as well, just to try and make it easier for dads to access, and working mums to access the programmes that we do. In terms of the DWP, again, we've had issues in the past where the kind of volunteering aspect, where the parents are obviously building up their own capacity through volunteering in the schools and getting good training to do that. You know, it's a robust training, where people have then been pulled out of a training session or something because they've had to go and do something with the DW because they didn't value it as a kind of legitimate work enhancing activity. But we,
equal for men and women then?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
I think Gary and then Ines. No, it's okay. Gary.
That's an excellent description of the work, you know, and I think it's interesting to sort of just restate the fact that it's a long haul. I mean, I think getting to more than double the numbers in 7 years is a real achievement. And it backs up the point about there being no quick fix. You can't just send a leaflet or put a poster up saying Fathers Group and expect the dads to come. It will involve the long haul. It will involve the minibuses. And the point that you made about mothers is an excellent one, because in the literature, mothers are sort of like regarded as the gatekeepers, and I think in practice they are. If they give permission for the father, and some of it's kind of tacit and some of it's implicit, explicit. But if they give permission, then actually the fathers, the possibilities of the fathers engaging and going to fathers groups are actually a lot higher. You know, so the last point about employment was another excellent question. And what I find in looking at services is that they're invariably configured on a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday basis. And clearly for working parents, both men and women, then stuff that happens during the day is actually going to pass them by.
Ines.
It's about employment and time. We do find it more difficult to engage our fathers, and we have to have sort of initiatives, and we have gone down the single. We have lots of things we do as together times, but the single fathers route. So perhaps wrongly we start by doing things like they come to be goalies, and save the children for charity. And then you take them inside and they don't know actually what's happening next, but they're actually then going to be building with their children. And so you subliminally get them involved in different things. But it's the time element, what we do, so we have to try and work out. So we have done, like we said, surveys to find out what's the best time. So a sort of late afternoon, we find a sort of 4 o'clock time is a time that the fathers will come in. Last year, we just sent something out. We just said, come to Fred. And we didn't know what would happen. Fred was fathers reading every day. And we didn't tell them. And because it was Fred, because it was male, they came. And we had a very good storytelling session and using props, and it was and they went away inspired. And what I think is very important, it's the sharing of that knowledge amongst their group. So when they go back to work, I went to this session and I learnt this and I didn't know about that, or I did know about it. Isn't that good that I knew about that? So it's the sharing of information. Workplace is something that I think we could be using more. The chance to allow fathers to share their information about their children and things. It's crucial, but time is very, very important. People are time poor.
I mean, do you get the impression, I mean, you couldn't study it, but the impression that some employers, some fathers are getting employers who are more flexible than others? Yes.
Donnie, I'd like to just say, Fiona, the example you gave for like the mothers checking the school bag for the newsletters, I actually saw myself actually going through that bag and thinking that's for me, and not thinking about the father in that aspect. So I think we've also got work to do on the mothers as well as actually attracting the fathers, which is really important.
Just in response to that and Gary's, mothers are the gatekeepers in that they can prevent dads, but equally they can be key in terms of getting dads to look at things. We have had dads who you ask, why are you here? Because I was told I'd to come. So, which is as good as any way.
Absolutely. Donnie.
Just on the schools thing, we've had a piece of legislation in Scotland, the Scottish Schools Parental Involvement Act, that's been in place for 8 years, I think. I'm not sure. It's had some impact, but one of the issues there that has only recently in Edinburgh we've sorted out about last year was to establish a communications policy between schools and parents, which is about including all parents and recognising that sometimes where parents are separated, you actually need to you can't even do it through the school bag with mums sort of helping out. You actually have to explicitly find out who are the relevant people in this child's life and make sure that you're getting the messages and the communications and inviting them to parents' evenings and all that kind of thing. Yeah. Can I also just echo this bit about there are not just setting up specific things, but sort of getting father involvement through the way services are delivered generally, or getting the way you respond right generally. I mean, I think we're actually lucky in Edinburgh with the number of initiatives that are around, the number of voluntary organisations that are running specific pieces of work around dads, and there's a lot of partnership between the local authority workers and these organisations, like Families Need Fathers or Dad's Rock or Dad's Club, which is partly run by One Parent Family Scotland, Circle, Stepping Stones, Chai out in Wester Hales, and so there's a lot of that kind of creating opportunities that's actually really effective, and I presume that they've really thought through the details about the minibuses and how you present your image and the kind of what kinds of activities you're offering that are attractive and so on. So there's things to be learned there in terms of sharing practice.
Alex, sorry.
Okay. This is where I'm going to now is about what we've been discussing all the way through this session. There's two terms that appear in my notes almost interchangeably, And it's happened during our discussion, although Christian started to bring out the difference in one of his earlier questions. And that is, the two terms are gender equality and gender neutrality. And as I said, they're used interchangeably in my notes. It's very obvious they're not interchangeable. They mean very different things. Now, for gender equality, I read inclusion of fathers, making sure that we do include fathers. For gender neutrality, when you take the gender out of it, I read for parent, read mother. Is there a problem with the concept of gender neutrality here, and do we have to replace it with gender equality?
Who would like to answer? Donnie, I'm going to pick you, Donnie.
Yes.
And then I'll go for Gary.
I think it would depend how you approach it, but I certainly think that gender neutrality in a range of contexts doesn't really work. And I suppose you just need to think fathers and mothers in this context. Yeah. And we need to make sure we're, and the issue of the 10% or the 27%, I mean, a lot of our stuff is 10%, you know, attendance at parenting programs of various kinds, responses to questionnaires, 10% of dads, 10, 11%. And so we really need to, you know, you can't just keep going with that when you know that fact. We need to actually do something specifically about dads.
Gary?
Yeah, I think that gender equality is an aspiration that we would all sign up to. I think that gender neutrality is a failed policy. I don't think it's worked. It hasn't actually included fathers. If we had set out to, recognise that we didn't want to talk about mothers and toddlers groups, and we should talk about, getting fathers and mothers involved in these groups, the failed policy part of it is calling them parents and toddlers groups. And we know from our experience, particularly at the frontline staff here, that that hasn't worked because, as I said earlier, the default position is when we read parents, we hear mothers.
Can I just ask, is it fair to say that even if you make your language gender neutral, if you've got the imagery that you have set out in your paper, then that's just going to reinforce that initial presumption?
Yes, so when you see something that's... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
But I mean, when you see something that's actually built for... As I say, if the envelope's intended for parents, but the image is a woman with children, then, there's a disconnect there. And so, therefore, you'll default to the position that, well, this must be for mums.
Fiona?
There's also an issue in the term parent, certainly for those of us working in education-based, is written into law. So there are definitions around about what parent means in terms of law. So trying to get it changed in policy, education departments can be a bit wary of how you term things, because there are specific definitions under the law and under the Education Act that says this is what a parent is, but it's not taking into consideration the gender of the parent. So there are difficulties around about that as well.
Well, seeing schools have come up, you've just mentioned schools. I mean, a couple of points on that, because we have had the suggestion that despite what the law says, in practice, schools default to the mother. And especially if the parents are apart, sometimes the father will only get information if the mother has already approved it. And then there's also been this suggestion slightly differently that a male teacher would get less flexibility for time off or parental leave than, and that's probably not to you, maybe that's more to Mr. Scott, than a female teacher. But I'm not sure if that was an isolated case or if you think that might be the case.
I don't know about that. I don't know whether a male teacher... I think the first one has been true, and I think that's what the Edinburgh policy is trying to address. I mean, it's been in place since June last year, and I don't know whether... I'm not sure what the impact of that has been, how it's been experienced. But in terms of the sort of personnel policy about whether, as a woman, you'd find it easier to get time off, I can't really... I don't know.
In practice, end up being very much dependent on the head teacher, then?
I really actually don't know how those things are. I'm more on the social work side of things, and I don't know how. I can imagine, but probably know better than you can.
Fiona?
Just in terms of the schools, I think to be fair to schools, sometimes the systems don't help. For example, when they're registering the child for school, it's kind of up to mum whether or not she gives out dad's information.
Yes.
So the schools are at a default from the very start where they don't necessarily know who dad is or where dad is or how to contact him. Equally, we have had dads who said they're not aware of the information that they're entitled to because nobody's actually ever said to them, you know, although you live separately, that they can get information from the school because they don't know where to start with that. There's no kind of information around about how do they access, what are they entitled to, because they do have entitlements in terms of if they've got parental rights for the schools to send out information and to make arrangements for parents' evenings. But if they don't know that, then they can't actually access that.
Schools to do everything, but do you think maybe there's a wee bit of an onus in the school right at the registration point to say we need both parents' information?
There is, but equally the departments have to take that on as well in terms of the systems, again, with health staff. We're, again, doing the awareness raising with some of the health staff that we've got. Their actual paperwork only asks for mum and doesn't necessarily have places for dad. So they had, in order to what they're saying is they're accountable and measured on the information that they give back, obviously. So if they're spending time working with dad but there's nowhere to record that, there's nowhere to evidence that, it's very difficult for them to justify the time that's been spent as well. So we definitely need to look at systems.
Thank you. Do any other members have any other questions they'd like to ask? No? Do any of the witnesses have anything else you'd like to say? No? Gary?
I'd just say that there's there's a typo in the last 3 lines of my paper. It's an important one, and it's the last thing I wanted to say, that this isn't a question of commission. There's no conspiracy out there, I think, and that's an important thing I believe, and it needs to be said. So it's more to do with unthinkingness, and rather than sort of a matter of commission. So I'll talk to the clerk about changing that. It's not a matter of commission so much as simply an unthinking, and it's the kind of things we maybe need to stop doing rather than start doing. So not a lot of resources involved in sort of stopping doing some of the things we've talked about.
Inez, yes.
To follow up something that Karen said about pre-birth, I sat on the National Under-3s advisory group representing NDNA, and it was actually one of the positive messages that came across from the research. And I think it's really crucially important that fathers are involved right from conception right the way through, because as we all know, the research is showing that start of that child's life is then and leading all the way through. So the pre-birth to 3 falling into the curriculum for excellence, it's crucial that if we can get these fathers engaged at that early stage, that's going to make life much better for that child. And I think the other thing to say at the end is that it's important that we all work together for this, that as an association we want to be as involved as possible.
Thanks very much. Listening to what everybody's saying, I think also, going back to what Fiona had actually says, that the message that you sent out was from the sort of base level of all the staff to include fathers, and I'm thinking of the message at the antenatal and also going through the early years, that it's the mother that's mainly involved in it. So the mother's picking up that message as well, which is then she's obviously thinking it's her responsibility, not knowingly, but actually in action and doing it by excluding the father. So I think it's really important we need to get that message out to the mother as well. But thank you all very much for coming along. It's been a really interesting session, very informative, and thank you all for your contributions. I'll now suspend the meeting to allow our second panel of witnesses to come in and take their seats, and thank you all again for coming along. Thank you. Welcome to our second panel. Can I start by asking the Minister and officials to introduce themselves, and can I also invite the Minister to make her opening remarks?
Thank you, Convener, and I'm joined today by Erica Clarkson and Simon Stockwell, and we all welcome the opportunity to talk to you about the committee's subject that you've been investigating. Now, the Scottish Government intends Scotland to be the best country in the world to grow up, a country where all our children and families have the opportunity to fulfil their potential. And I know that in gathering evidence for your inquiry, a number of clear themes have arisen for your consideration, and those issues echo those that arose during our very wide-ranging consultation with parents and professionals right across Scotland, which helped to inform the development of our national parenting strategy. Now, the parenting strategy launched in October 2012 supports all those in a parenting role and recognises that fathers absolutely should be involved in their children's lives. It also acknowledges fathers' needs for professional support with issues affecting their ability to be confident, proactive and successful parents. Through the strategy, we're working with partners to examine how to make services relevant and able to involve fathers positively in their children's lives, how to make the strategy fit for fathers, and what we really need to do is to listen effectively and respond to what dads really want. Now, as we move forward with the implementation of the parenting strategy, we will continue to ensure that services such as health, education and the third sector make dads feel welcome and included. For example, we're currently working with children in Scotland to look at ways in which our public bodies can ensure more equal treatment of dads when it comes to parenting responsibilities. We're also working with employers to support them in creating workplaces which encourage a better work-life balance for everyone. So that we can help dads to thrive at home and at work, we have formed a new partnership with Fathers Network Scotland, parenting across Scotland and working families to try and change the way Scotland's parents live and work. Through funding for organisations like Men in Childcare, we're acting to redress the gender imbalance and raise awareness of the need for more men to opt for a career in our early years sector. Elsewhere, we're investing in projects such as Families Need Fathers and Fathers Network Scotland to ensure that the voices of dads are heard. Along with Fathers Network Scotland, we co-chair the Fathers Advisory Panel, which met just earlier this week, to consider how fathers can contribute to policy and practice development right across government. And most recently, the panel have been helping us to restyle our Play, Talk, Read and Family Information Services website to ensure they work in a way that speaks to dads. In addition, we're working with the panel and Fathers Network Scotland to develop clear, simple messages about GIRFEC and the named person. We've also sought the views of dads in developing the sexual health and relationship education resource for secondary schools. And as well as this, we're working with young men and fathers as we take forward the development of the new teenage pregnancy and young parent strategy. We'll also be working with the panel and Fathers Network Scotland over the next few months to map the delivery of support groups for dads across Scotland so that we can better understand the provision and consider what needs to be done to encourage participation and wider access. Furthermore, in partnership with Families Need Fathers, we have been gathering data from local authorities on policy and practice in schools in relation to fathers and non-resident parents. And this is being used to develop good practice guides for schools, and NHS Scotland have been working with a group of dads to father-proof a range of resources and to inform the development of new content to be made available on the Ready Steady Baby website. The overhaul will include a father section, usability testing with fathers and development of a communication strategy for the launch. I believe we have made solid progress over recent years, but absolutely recognise that there is still a long way to go if we are to ensure that all parents, dads included, get the support they need when they need it to be the best that they can for their children. So thank you, Convener, for the opportunity to provide this statement, and I hope that gives a flavour of some of the activity we've been doing across government that reflects very, very well the theme that you have been looking into these past few weeks. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask, would Simon... Do you have anything to say at all about it?
Thank you, not at this stage, Convener.
No? Okay, thank you. Can I pass you over to Marco?
Thank you, Convener. One of the areas that really keeps on coming up is the perceptions of what a typical parent is. And obviously we're coming at this in this inquiry from a father's perspective, but that has gender equality implications in both directions. If the typical parent is seen to be the mother, that reinforces traditional gender stereotypes for both genders. And the area that's really come in evidence is the presentation of this through public agencies, through the documents that are published, through going to a GP's surgery and the kind of posters you see promoting parenting services, but it's usually a woman and child. Is that something you would see, is that something you would share as an analysis? And if you would agree that that is something we should address, how much scope is there to deal with that from the level of government? And can we see things, when would we start to see things filtering down with new guidance or whatever?
No, and I think you touch upon a key point, and certainly that was a point as well that we found when we were developing the national parenting strategy. We did a lot of work with different groups using third sector partners to use their networks to enable us to gather as many different views from right across the country from different parents, and that it wasn't just mums and dads, it was kinship carers, other groups of people who are fulfilling that parenting role. And that did come up around, from specifically the fathers groups, around the images that are presented around different public services. So absolutely we understand that there is a need to try and make that much more balanced. And in our own development of our own documents, such as the parent strategy itself and the magazine that accompanied it, we tried very hard to make sure that there was a much more balanced bunch of pictures and to accompany those things that had fathers within that role. But we do know as well that I said in my opening remarks that we're working with our partners. So, for instance, the Fathers Forum, the NHS Fathers Forum, is looking to make sure that they can father-proof some of their products and their documents as well. I mentioned the Ready Steady Baby document that's going to be tested as well in terms of how it speaks to fathers as well. And we are already taking a bit of work through the Fathers Advisory Panel to make sure that we can map services there for fathers and to see what more needs to be done. But certainly there have been a few tangible areas of progress on that, but we do recognise that more needs to be done, and certainly from our own point of view, things that we present as a government need to have the right images that can speak to the situations that all families are currently living in.
It's very helpful that this has come up in the development of the National Parenting Strategy and has been dealt with in that, but we've been presented with examples from right across government and agencies and local authorities and so on of areas where the default has slipped into the gender stereotype. And is this something you see being an initiative across government to make sure not just the strategy but the likes of Education Scotland or Child Protection, all of these other documents get the kind of look they need for this? Because the parallel I would use in some things was the inclusion of diverse ethnicities, which is something that communications departments all know to do, to make sure it's not solely white faces. Are we going to have the same level of awareness on this issue in gender and parenting?
I mean, in terms of my portfolio, which is for children and young people, and the parenting strategy was developed, but certainly it was something that was developed that was needed to be reflected across the whole of government, because lots of different strands of it were touching upon other areas of government. So absolutely we need to make sure that we don't take the foot off the gas on that particular issue around making sure that we're practising what we preach as a government, that we're not saying to others that you have to make sure that your images are correct and reflective of the needs and requirements of fathers, but to make sure that our own documents are as able to reflect the diverse situations that families present themselves in. So we need to make, like I say, we've made progress, but we're not complacent, and we know and understand that we need to do more. And I think that's why the parenting strategy, your investigation, is coming at a good time, because it allows us to reflect further what more needs to be done, and the evidence that you've taken has been helpful.
Thank you. Siobhan, and then Alex Johnson.
Thank you. Obviously the parenting strategy is to be welcomed, and I certainly welcomed it in the debate that we had on the issue. However, in some of the evidence that we've heard, again, the imagery for the strategy was a problem, because it didn't recognise fathers in the way that people had thought it would. We've heard that in evidence. We've also seen in the recent children's panel advert and the early years framework that, again, fathers are missing from it, or when they are there, it's in negative terms rather than positive terms, and that has come up in evidence. So I understand that we're trying to get somewhere, but it's how that progress is being monitored by government when things come up? And just one example, the Children and Young People's Bill, how will that then be advertised? What proactive things are happening to allow councils then to replicate that information as they go through the strategies as they'll be implemented?
Early years framework preceded the development of the parenting strategy. So certainly, you know, we now need to use the parenting strategy, the views and opinions that were expressed through that to make sure that that informs how we take through government policy and make sure that the documentation properly reflects the situations that families are living in. We did try very hard to make sure the parenting strategy and the accompanying magazine that went along with it. So there was the magazine that went along with it, and there was the parenting strategy itself. And we did try to make sure that it did reflect fathers. But if others feel that there needs to be that needed to be done more, then that's something we can take back and reflect upon when we publish any more documents. But certainly the early years framework was preceding the parenting strategy. Getting it right for every child in the Children and Young People Bill. We're working with the National Parenting Forum to make sure that we get messages around the bill absolutely right, and that will need to reflect all parents as well. And it's not just mums and dads, it's potentially grandparents, adoptive fathers, adoptive parents, foster parents as well. It needs to be reflective of all parenting circumstances as well. But you know, the guidance is getting developed and will be developed in consultation and collaboration with a number of different groups to make sure that it does you know, do what is required of it.
Well, it should have been clear. I understand that the early years framework came out before the parenting strategy, but what I mean is we're still working on that early years framework. People are still talking to that, they're using that as their strategies for implementing things, and yet we're still using the document that has the picture. So is there any way of changing those in retrospect, given that the National Parenting Strategy says that that's where we're trying to work towards?
We're working the early years frameworks is there, and it's a document that is informing the way in which government works in terms of early intervention, effectively intervening in a child's life at the earliest opportunity. We've also got the groundbreaking Early Years Collaborative now as well, which has taken forward Test of Change right across the country, is delivering really good and tangible results for young people around the country as well. And it's the first time this improvement methodology has been used anywhere in the world in this multi-agency way. And one of the learning sessions we had a presentation from Dad's Rock. So we're making sure that we can utilise the views and the expertise of many different groups from around the country to ensure that the early years practice is reflective of the needs of fathers. And that's one example of where early years work is making sure that dads are prominent within that picture.
So the answer is we'll continue with the same picture that we've had in the early years. What I'm trying to get to is, see if there was a picture out there for any other ethnic minority that we thought, you know, that wasn't the right strategy to take, we're working towards something else, we would retrospectively change those. There's been many examples of that over very different governments. So if we're now saying the strategy that we wish to implement is to see a more reflective view of society, and we're still working on documents and we're still implementing, as you said, and you've given us many examples of those, we'll still continue with the same pictures as we've been handing out, is what you're saying. So that's yes.
No, because we're talking about getting it right for every child, the guidance that will accompany that, the fact that we've got the Fathers Forum for NHS, the fact that they're refreshing the Ready Steady Baby documents, which are new. Well, yes. Ready Steady Baby isn't new, it's a refresh of what's already there, and that's been going to be refreshed in light of their Fathers Forum that has been established. So there's tangible, quite significant tangible improvements going around different services. But I say again, you know, we understand that more needs to be done, but we're making progress on that. Erica, did you want to add?
Well, just to add in that we are. I'm not aware of the images that you're referring to, I'm afraid, but certainly we're working really hard with our partners in the National Fathers Advisory Panel and beyond to make sure that we do get the messages out there that are a bit clearer and a bit more. Speak a little bit better to dads as well. So we are working on that.
I'm sure we can give you the academic report that the committee have received, if that helps. But again, just on the other partners as well, local authorities and NHS, how then that feeds down to them and how that is monitored.
They are represented on the National Fathers Advisory Panel as well, and this is a strand of work that we are taking forward with quite some enthusiasm and energy now. So I think that I think that we are covering all bases by involving as many people as we can in the discussions about what it is that we need to put out there in terms of messaging for dads and for mums as well. But obviously in this instance, we want to try and get it right for dads.
And of course, getting it right for every child, the guidance that will accompany that will be absolutely requiring input from local authorities as well. And throughout the bill, there'll be joint service planning between health and local authorities. And we'll need to make sure that that's reflective of the requirements set out in the parenting strategy.
There was a commitment in the National Parenting Strategy that set out how we would carry out a mapping exercise just to see what national information was really out there, both ours and other agencies. And we looked at advice that was available to parents right across Scotland. And we commissioned Children First to carry out that research on our behalf. And they published their report in November. And that did actually highlight some of the issues that you've raised today. But we're now looking at the recommendations that are set out within that report and seeing how we can best meet those.
Thank you. Alex Johnson.
Thank you. There are two ways we can go about promoting positive and engaged parenting. We can either take the gender-neutral approach, or we can take the approach of promoting parenting in a clearly identifiable father's or mother's sense. What we heard earlier is that the problem with gender neutrality in this area is that in many cases for parent, read mother, it's as simple as that. That seems to be the way it works. Do you see a difference there, and do you have a specific view on what the government's approach is now?
The parenting strategy we developed was for all parents, and not just mums and dads, but adoptive parents, foster carers, kinship carers, and trying to be as reflective as it can be for all the situations that families are currently living in. So that influences the way in which we're taking forward government policy, to be absolutely mindful that when you say parents, that it's not a default position of just accepting that to be the mother, but it has to be mindful that different families live in different ways, that fathers will be the primary carer for some families, some parents will be adoptive parents as well. It could be the grandfather that's looking after the children if they're a kinship carer. So the parenting strategy absolutely spoke to all parents, but we do have a challenge because you're absolutely right. Oftentimes the default position is accepting that that is just the mother, but that's not the case for families right across the country, and that's why when we engaged with many families across the country that we needed to make sure that our parenting strategy meant that it was reflective of all parents across the country.
It reflects all parents across the country. But is it adequately specifically targeted at specific types of parents, basically fathers, for the purposes of this inquiry? Are we talking about parents and trying to include fathers, or are we targeting fathers directly?
The parenting strategy had over 80 commitments, and certainly a number of them were specific around fathers, so around making sure that we helped with redressing the gender balance in earlier settings. So we fund men in childcare. We've done other things around the Children in Scotland report that Erica mentioned. We're now taking forward that further through the mapping process that the National Fathers Advisory Panel are making progress with at the moment, to try and see what more we need to do around the services that are being taken forward and around the country. So there was a number of commitments that were specific for fathers within the parenting strategy, even though there was that kind of umbrella approach to make sure it reflected all parents and those in caring roles. Did you want to add something?
Just add to add to what the Minister just said, when we consulted very broadly for the parenting strategy in the development stage of that, we spoke to around 1,500 parents to get their views, and a number of agencies as well. 500 of those were fathers, and we heard very strongly, as the Minister's already said, that we needed to make sure that the strategy spoke to them, and that's why there is quite a strong father focus right through the strategy, where we're trying to encourage agencies and organisations to think about them as they're implementing their practice and policies.
I raised this matter earlier in the previous panel. The comparison between the gender equal or the gender neutral approach was developed to some extent, but there was one witness in particular suggested that there may be an element within legislation which almost prescribes the gender neutral approach rather than a gender equal approach. Is that the case? Is there anything there that makes it difficult to promote the role of fathers specifically?
Certainly within the recently passed Children and Young People Bill, when we've embedded elements of getting it right for every child, that there's no, it doesn't favour one parent over another, so that certainly isn't
but
in legislation.
I'm not suggesting that favours one parent over another. What I'm suggesting is that the gender-neutral approach has the effect of, where we talk about parents, in most institutional situations, for parent, read mother. Mother is the default parent.
Okay, so the children bill that was passed, so I guess the principle of getting it right for every child, and that was through, Siobhan laid a number of amendments there around specific groups of children, and where the approach that we took within the bill was to make sure that it was getting it right for every child, that it would be working to achieve positive outcomes for all children. And some of the amendments that Siobhan raised, we made a commitment that we would take forward that through guidance and relevant guidance and engage with stakeholders. So the point around guidance to accompany the bill would allow us to ensure that maybe fathers are more properly reflected in amongst some of the policies that we want to take forward, if that's a requirement, and certainly around the networks that we've built up following on from the parenting strategy, around the Fathers Forum that the NHS have, our advisory panel that's taking forward work just now. They will be in a good place to input into the guidance to allow us to ensure that that default position isn't just further ingrained through the passing of this bill.
We're moving in the right direction then.
Well, like I said at the start, I believe we have made progress. We've made quite tangible progress in many different places. But you've heard a number of witnesses come to you that show that we do need to make further progress, and that's something that we've always been mindful of as well. That we're taking forward good policies, but we need to go further in some areas. And I think that's been one of the views that some of the views that you've had through your evidence sessions, that we're needing to continue with this.
John and then Mark.
I'm on to a slightly different subject. Is that okay?
Okay.
I'm curious to know just what tools you have at your disposal here, because I think our issue isn't what's in the national parenting strategy and what's happening at the government level. It's when you percolate down to every group in a community centre meeting around the country, and what used to be mother and toddler is now parent and toddler, which is progress. But what's coming up is it's still mother and toddler, and what we really need is like mums and dads and kids or something like that. You mentioned the guidance there and the strategy. What do you actually have available in your policy suite to try and make this filter down?
The parenting strategy, I know that we go back to that again, but that was to articulate the importance of parents, to change a culture as well. So that is one powerful tool that government has. We have the power to influence change at that national top level, in that top level sense. Legislation there is another powerful tool that we have as a government to make further cultural change as well. And you're right, there are maybe persistent issues around mother and toddler, and that default position that you go back to the mother, and whether or not we have influence over those it's maybe questionable, but certainly the parenting strategy is to articulate the importance of parents, all parents, and to bring about that cultural change. Now, the early years collaborative as well, though, is making sure that we do things innovatively and in collaboration with small tests of change, and we're developing good results, and we're making tangible progress. And that's a way to, as well, get messages across, because we're bringing together people from across all 32 local authorities, community planning partnerships, into one area. So the last learning session had about 800, just shy of 800 folk in the room, and we're able to articulate the messages that we're wanting to get across. And like I say, Dad's Rock were one of the groups that presented at one of the previous learning sessions. So we have the opportunity to influence, and we've got the ability to bring about culture change through our own national messaging, and we've got partners who are keen to do that further. So the NHS Fathers Forum, making sure that their literature is father-proofed, making sure that the advisory panel work does develop changes and does have tangible results and benefits through making mapping out the work that they're taking forward, that we can make sure that there is tangible progress in that sense. So yeah, we have, there are limits, but certainly around the culture change, the national messaging, we can make good on that.
Thank you. Area I wanted to move on to was, role models, and I suppose if we start off with schools, but it does affect other aspects, childcare, caring professions generally, that we seem to be seeing quite a small number of men going into primary school teaching, for example. And, I mean, we've had evidence this is not just a Scottish problem, this appears to be throughout Europe, it's the case, and if anything, the trend is away from, the number of men percentage-wise seems to be reducing here, and it has to be said in other countries. I mean, we've asked various witnesses about that. I just wonder if you think what we can do, is it the government, is it local authorities, is it just a general change in cultural attitude?
In terms of some of the direct things that we've done, we fund men in childcare as well, and that's a project to encourage more men into childcare in those earliest years of a child's life, and that has meant that we're trying to work hard to redress some of the gender imbalances that we see in the early years sector, and raise awareness of the need for more men to get into those roles. Employment of teachers is, I guess, is a local authority issue, but what we want to do is make sure that the very best teachers are employed, but also to make sure it's an attractive profession for people to get in, and some of that may mean making sure that men understand that this is a viable profession for them, and that again, it might come to some of the images that we see, but certainly in terms of the childcare in the early years setting, we're certainly directly funding a group to try and redress that gender imbalance.
Because I think, and I'm sure we all agree that the legislation is absolutely equal and all that kind of thing. It's when it comes to the practice, in some cases, that it's just not happening. And I don't know. I mean, schools are quite devolved organisations, I suppose, and we've had some evidence from men that they're actually, they don't feel welcome when most of their colleagues are women. But I know that can be both sides. That lots of women could say a similar thing. Is that just one of these things that hopefully will change over time?
I've seen a slight, it's been a modest increase. We've seen an increase over the last couple of years of men going into the teaching workforce. So that's to be welcomed. And yeah, you're right, women often feel that they are the ones that are in the minority in many different work settings, and I don't think anyone, though, thinks a complete gender imbalance in our workforce is a healthy thing. So we need to work hard at that culture change. But again, we want to make sure, though, we're getting the best teachers possible for our children as well, and a lot of those decisions will be made at a local authority level. But in terms of children in the earliest years, we've tried to redress that imbalance that we see in that particular workforce through funding men in childcare, and hopefully we'll see some progression made there, and hopefully that will start to bring about a cultural change as well. And no doubt there will have been fathers who have felt that when they go to a school, if all the teachers are women as well, that is oftentimes a barrier for them as well. So we need to just make sure that we're being as welcoming as we can to men in the profession, and to also make sure that within a school setting that they're being as welcoming to fathers as well.
We did have one suggestion, I don't know if it was isolated, that a man in any employment, but particularly in a school, as a teacher, would be treated less favourably for, if they wanted a bit of flexibility to get parental leave, or to get away early to pick up the child or take the child to the doctor, or that kind of thing, that women would be treated more favourably than men. Is there anything, again, the government can do in that, or is that purely down to the individual school?
See, what we have been doing in terms of flexible working more generally, we have just the other week, we, along with our partners, Fathers Network Scotland, Parenting Across Scotland and Working Families, we're exploring ways in which we can make workplaces much more family-friendly through more flexible working. Tonight, there is the Institute of Directors Awards, and one of the awards that we sponsor is around companies who have shown excellence in terms of allowing their workforce to have family-friendly, flexible working practices. So that's something that award that's about the second year of us sponsoring that award, is to try and, amongst a group of people who wouldn't normally necessarily engage in this type of subject, is to try and showcase the way in which businesses are doing their bit to allow families to have a better work-life balance. And this piece of work that we announced just 2 weeks ago, along with those partners that I mentioned, are going to be taking forward bits of work to allow us to change the culture in many work settings, to allow fathers to have access as well to flexible working patterns, to allow them to have a much stronger role with their children's lives. So those are areas in which we are trying to directly influence, because as well, though, we know that for businesses, flexible working is a good thing. It can be beneficial to staff morale, it can up productivity as well. So those are some of the messages that we're wanting to get out there to allow business to understand that it's not all about them giving the flexible working, but actually they can benefit from that as well.
And just one other area that, in relation to schools, especially if the parents are apart and the father's seeking to get information, we've had the suggestion that the school will often kind of default to the mother and will maybe even check with the mother if the father is to be allowed access to information. Again, I mean, is that something we can change centrally, or is that more of a culture locally?
Well, certainly the legislation does say that people should be taking account of different family circumstances, and that would be best practice would be to ensure that both parents are fully aware of situations in the school, and that they are the school is aware of the family situation. So the Act and legislation doesn't in itself suggest that there should be a default position to one parent. The Act is about encompassing the whole gambit of situations that families may face themselves in. So the legislation doesn't...
you accept that in practice, there is sometimes a bit of a default towards the mother.
Well, I think, again, it's this cultural change that we're needing to bring about, and this default position that the mother is the parent and the mother has the caring role. From my own background, my own situation, my husband is the primary carer for our wee boy. So from personal experience, we know how important it is to allow fathers to have that positive role within their child's life. So, this is something that we need to work at, but the legislation doesn't prohibit teachers from allowing fathers to have a full role in their child's life. And of course there's curriculum for excellence as well. All these other things that are gradually changing the situation that's there.
Thank you. Christian?
Yes, thanks very much, Convener. Just a couple of questions, Minister. One thing, first of all, the getting it right for every child. I think it's a groundbreaking policy. It's exactly what we need for every children. But do you think that inside this policy should we have a subtitle, get it right for every parent? Because, like my colleague said before me, it seems that it's not trickling down to what it should be. We're not talking about parents, we're talking only about mother when it comes to implementation. So have you got a part of it where we can get it right for every parent? And I understand there are many other kind of parenting, but really we have discovered during this inquiry that there's a great emphasis, and we don't seem to be progressing. And it maybe even going back the way at some of the places. But one particularly, that's my second question, if you can answer both at the same time, is you said, I think Mr. Tocqueville give you some of the figures, that teachers, we are progressing, more and more teachers, more and more men are coming into the profession now. I say
we'd seen modest progress, we'd seen a modest increase. It was modest, but it was like an increase nonetheless.
The modest increase, but we tried to find out. It seems the modest increase would be in secondary, but it seems that in primary schools we are going back the way. We're not talking about gender inequalities in primary. We're talking about no absence of role model, father's role model there. Have you got any figures on this, Mr. Stockwell?
Yeah, well, there has been a percentage increase in male primary teachers since, and it's the highest level since 1997. But I do caveat that by saying it has been a modest increase. Up to 9% of the workforce in the primary teaching sector was male. So it's modest, but it's going in the right direction. So I would hesitate to kind of agree with the assertion that we're going backwards in your opening remarks. Getting it right for every child is about getting it right for every child, and that's the whole well-being of a child. So we embedded well-being within the legislation as well. And we know that having the interaction with both parents is important for the well-being of that child, where that's appropriate. And so getting it right for every child will mean being reflective of the positive roles that children, both parents, can play in that child's life. And we have the National Parenting Forum within the Programme Implementation Board. So we'll be making sure that our messages are absolutely correct for the legislation for parents. Now, I know also that there were differences of opinion around the named person, but the named person provision based in universal services gives support to parents should they require it. So that is another layer of support that parents, both parents, male and female, can access, and that's as a result of the bill.
But it's strange because even when I hear you saying, Minister, that getting it right for every child and every parent, when it's, how did you form it, if I remember, when it's possible, when it's appropriate.
When it's appropriate.
Appropriate. I hear when fathers can, when it's appropriate for fathers to get involved. I know it's not what you are saying, but it's what I hear, and but it's what people are hearing. So it's to try to formulate this and to make sure that it's trickling down, not as I am hearing it and everybody else is hearing it, but how getting right for every parent. I don't know how can we formulate that to really recognise the fact, to change social attitude.
Well, the GIRFEC approach doesn't assume anything negative about a parent. It assumes that for a child to flourish, that they need the love and the nurture and the support of parents, and for that to be both parents if that's the circumstances that the child is in. And it has to be said when appropriate as well. For some children, the birth parents might no longer have a role in that child's life as well, and they may be looked after in a foster setting or an adoptive setting as well. So there are lots of different situations where families face themselves in. But we want to embrace the opportunity that we have with the guidance in the bill and having the National Parenting Forum as part of the programme board to ensure that our messages and the guidance that we develop to allow for the successful implementation of the bill are as mindful of the issues that have arisen through, for instance, your investigation on this issue. And to make sure, though, that fathers do feel properly part of this too, because you have raised an awful lot of very good issues that challenge government, that challenge local authorities, that challenge our perceptions as a country as well. But I do think, though, again, back to the contention that you made that we have been going backwards, I think actually we've been making an awful lot of progress, and some of the things that we've identified that we need to do more on are being taken forward, whether that's through the mapping exercise, whether that's through the NHS father-proofing all their documents and all their policy guidance. So I think we are making good progress, but we do need to make sure that we're working together and never taking the foot off the gas, because it's likely it could be one of those things that could slip, and we can't allow that to happen.
Thanks very much for this, Minister. If we could get the figures, because I don't think we get them, Convener, it'd be very helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Marco.
I think it's moved on actually a little bit. I was just more interested to know what the uptake had been and the interest in that award you mentioned at the IOD. Just are the companies fighting for it? I'm not asking you to give away the winner and spoil the envelope moment from tonight.
The spoiler alert.
Yes, I won't tell you who the winner is. But, last year we had a very small number of entrants for that particular category of the awards. I think we had 2 or 3. It predates me, so I'd need to check that. But this year we've had 6 nominations, so it's something that's picking up momentum, and they were very good quality. It was a very tough, close call. So.
And also, just though, on the back of that, we're happy to keep the committee informed as work progresses with the family flexible working work that we're taking forward as well, because I think that is quite a significant piece of work that will hopefully bear fruit around the culture change that I think we all seek.
We would welcome that as well, Minister. Siobhan.
Thank you. It's just on the family-friendly work that you mentioned, and specifically when we were discussing with the STUC, Modern Apprenticeship Scheme came up. So just wondering if young parents who are in the apprenticeship scheme are able to train part-time or for a longer period, if that would be included in the new family-friendly working
Well, I understand that the modern apprentices work at the pace of the persons who are undertaking that apprenticeship. So that should, I would imagine, be mindful of the parenting role that young apprentice may have. But happy again, to take that into the work that has been taken forward by the working group.
Just a point of clarification, because we didn't know the answer to this. Can they claim paternity or maternity leave while they're going through the apprenticeship?
Yes, they can. All apprentices must be employed in the normal, usual manner, and that means that modern apprentices are real jobs, and that they have, obviously they've got vocational training attached, but they have the rights that go with those very real jobs, and they are therefore entitled to the same paternal, maternal and parental leave as anybody else would be.
Could I actually come in on this as well, because I actually know a bit of the answer to that. Regarding the part-time, all the modern apprenticeships, they can actually work to a minimum of 16 hours a week, so they could reduce their working hours, and the time scale for them to complete it can be extended. And I think there's also the ability to actually have a break as well, and then restart the programme as well within it. So, and that again, it's down to the employers for the terms and conditions of the modern apprenticeship programme. Can I pass on to Christian now?
Christian, sorry, just a little supplementary on apprenticeship. We heard very good stories this morning about the private sector working very well with apprenticeship for carers, for the care sector, for the private care sector. And we heard beforehand that there are very good examples in the private sector of exclusivity and being flexible hours for fathers, something we didn't hear so much in the public sector. So I don't know, I know you're going to have an award. I hope you are involving not only the big companies and not only the public sector, but as well the small and medium companies. It seems to, from our inquiry, been very, very good and very flexible to fathers.
And the work that's getting taken forward will be equally applicable to ensuring we're working with the public sector as well. And certainly from a government point of view, government civil servants have the opportunity to work flexibly as well. I'm sure Erica might be able to elaborate on that too.
Today is my flexible working day. Here I am. Yeah, certainly we are going to reach out right across all sectors, and we're going to speak with employers in the public sector, in the private sector and in the third sector. There were nominations from all sectors in this year's awards as well. So,
One of the draftsmen of the bill you've just considered took paternity leave when he was drafting amendments for stage 2. So that was an interesting question about how quickly would we get them done in time, or would the other draftsman have to do them instead?
Can I ask a question as well, Minister? In that you mentioned about the Ready Steady Baby website, and you were talking about the Play Talk Read initiative as well. Yes. There is lots of initiatives out there for fathers, but the big problem is a lot of fathers aren't actually getting information to them. It's out there in the internet or a big black hole somewhere, but the information's not coming to them, so they don't know what programmes, initiatives they could actually join. So it's great that you've got these initiatives, but how are you going to make sure that the actual fathers know about them and they don't just sit on the internet being unused?
Well, the Play Talk Read campaign, we are currently looking at ways in which that can be improved to allow more fathers to access the hints and tips and the key messages that we're promoting through that around playing, talking, reading with your wee one from day one. So that's currently a bit of work that's underway at the moment around ensuring that can be better used by parents. And the Ready Steady Baby is getting looked at as well in terms of allowing it to be more father friendly. And there's the mapping exercise that we're currently taking forward again that will be allowing us to be better placed to ensure that fathers are able to access these key messages and to be a full part of their child's life, especially in those early years. And actually, one of the nice things, if diverting a wee bit from your question, but it was at Sense Scotland a week or two ago, and one of the music therapists had talked about men feeling very much left out in the antenatal setting, and she was talking around the bassy tones of a father's voice penetrates the womb much more ably than female voices. So men do have a critical role at that very important period of that child developing inside the mother's womb, because if they're singing and talking happily to the child, then that's allowing that child to develop and to be connected already when it's born. So I think those are quite nice things to allow fathers to feel very important during what is often a time when mothers are the centre of the services.
Do any other members have any questions they'd like to ask? No? Okay. Minister, would you like to give any closing remarks?
No, other than, through the work that we're taking forward that we've outlined today, we're very happy to keep the committee engaged in that. And again, thank the committee for the work that you've done and for the opportunity to present some of the activity that we're taking forward as a government to achieve, I think, what is the same aim that you have, is allowing fathers to play a full and active role in their children's lives. Thank you.
Coming along. That concludes the oral evidence on our Fathers and Parenting Inquiry and the public part of today's meeting. Our next meeting will take place on the 24th of April, when we will consider a draft report on the Fathers and Parenting Inquiry, as well as our approach to the scrutiny of the Scottish Government's draft budget for 2015-2016. And I now suspend the meeting to allow the room to clear before we move into private. Thank you.